The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Island has a point of order.
I rise at this time on a point of order to address in advance my rights at report stage under Bill C-23, the Fair Elections Act. Mr. Speaker, you'll recall this is a narrative which has come up a few times in terms of the rights of members of Parliament, positions like myself, members of Parliament of a smaller party that doesn't yet have 12 members and become recognized in that sense, and the rights of independent members of Parliament. We do know the principles here that, in theory, all members of Parliament are equal, and that we are here as members of Parliament, as many of your rulings have attested, with the right and responsibility to turn our attention to every single piece of legislation that goes through this place and to have a meaningful opportunity to present amendments to improve legislation. Now, you will recall, Mr. Speaker, my intention with this point of order is not to draw it out. I will be as succinct as I possibly can be. I'd like to review the factual situation in which I find myself and then distinguish for you the current situation from the normal situation within committees. So the situation in which I find myself, Mr. Speaker, is that due to the rules of parliamentary procedure, members of Parliament, my position, either members of smaller parties or independents, on the face of it, have a right to present substantive amendments at report stage because we are not allowed to be full members or members at all of parliamentary committees. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, and since you recall it, I won't drag out with precedents and reminders of citations, that the Honourable Government House Leader attempted in November of 2012 to suggest that the rights of persons such as myself, in fact, he referred to the Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands as the impetus for his efforts, should not be allowed to present amendments at report stage that are substantive, but should have a test amendment put forward, and if that one failed, none of the rest of the amendments would be heard at all. You ruled on that, Mr. Speaker, back in December of 2012 that that would not be sufficient. You cited with approval the words of former Speaker John Fraser, who in October 10th, 1989 said, quote, "We are a parliamentary democracy, not a so-called executive democracy, nor a so-called administrative democracy," close quote. You went on to say, Mr. Speaker, that since I did not have the rights to present any amendments at committee, I must have the rights to present them at report stage. And then your ruling went on to create something of a door, a crack in the door that said that if there's a quote-unquote satisfactory method that can be found for a member in a position such as myself to have amendments considered at committee, then I wouldn't have a double ability to come back at report stage. So the Conservatives in the House used that crack in the door from your December 2012 ruling to great effect. They created identical motions that were presented by Conservative members of Parliament in every committee right after the speech from the throne in the fall of 2013. And I've been living under that new set of rules. Now, since my motion at the moment, Mr. Speaker, my point of order, deals specifically with the House Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, I can refer to their motion, although in point of fact, all the motions passed by every committee were identical. This was a motion put forward and approved by the committee on October 29th, 2013. The motion was put forward and to the following effect, and I won't read all of it, I'll just summarize it, that I have to, and other members of my position, if we want to have amendments considered to legislation, must present them to the committee 48 hours ahead of when the committee begins clause by clause, and that the committee process will deem that the motions are moved because, of course, not being a member of the committee, I can't move them. As well, I can't debate them. As well, I can't participate fully before the committee during hearing of testimony of witnesses. I don't believe, as you know, Mr. Speaker, that this process is satisfactory at all. I think the impact of your motion and your decision back in the fall of 2012 was clear that the process should be satisfactory to both the committee and to members in my situation. However, I've lived with this set of rules. I'm doing my best to live with this set of rules. I've endeavored to present amendments 48 hours ahead of clause by clause, to participate even within the very tight strictures of the rules. But here's the key one, Mr. Speaker. At subclause C, quote, "During the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them," close quote. Forgive me for taking a moment to say the following. The chair of the committee dealing with Bill C-23 and chair of the Procedural and House Affairs Committee did an exemplary job. Fair to a fault, and an extraordinary job in terms of his personal efforts to maintain an amicable atmosphere between all parties in a very controversial and highly charged bill. I do not for one moment blame the chair for the fact that he was prevented from fulfilling a condition precedent to anything that then occurred with my involvement in committee. I presented my amendments. They were deemed to be put forward, but I was denied in the case of the surviving 11 amendments, which were past the point of 5 p.m. last Thursday. There was no debate allowed on my amendments, and I was prevented from making any representation, brief or otherwise, to my amendments. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to go back, if I can, for a moment, to the normal situation, because it is the case, and I think that the default position of many in this place, particularly some who want to deny me my rights at this point, will go back to the default position of, well, the committee is the master of its own affairs. A committee made the decision. The committee decided it had to finish its work by 5 o'clock by debate so that by midnight all the clause by clause could be through. It really doesn't matter that democracy in this place is diminished by such a rule, but the committee made the rule and the Speaker can't interfere. This condition, Mr. Speaker, in this situation is remarkably different and is completely distinguished and different from the ruling that, for instance, you gave in relation to the member from King's Hants who complained of a similar process, and your ruling of November 29, 2012 deals with that particular set of parameters, a committee process in which the Speaker is not engaged. The Speaker has, as I know is the usual wisdom, the Speaker has no business interfering with the business of committee because the committees are master of their own affairs. Except in this instance, Mr. Speaker. It is only due to your ruling that my rights at report stage can be infringed, my rights in report stage can be reduced, my rights in my report stage can be essentially eliminated if a process pursuant to your ruling is found to be satisfactory. Only due to your ruling was this new process invented. And the new process states unequivocally, the chair shall allow a member with diminished rights, no ability to participate fully, no ability to vote, no ability to even move my own amendments, no ability to ask the witnesses questions, very circumscribed, limited, and in fact, I think in some ways fraudulent opportunity. But the minimum thing that this motion passed in every committee insists upon is that on every amendment which I have put forward for clause by clause, as a member of Parliament, with equal rights to everyone in this place, and the same applies for the other independents, whether Edmonton, St. Albert, or Peterborough, or the members who represent the Bloc Québécois, or other members within the Green Party, or the member from Ahusat, we have the right to work on every bill in this place, whether we're members of committee or not. So this new construct has been created. We've put ourselves within it. Many of us have worked very hard, not just myself, to present amendments during clause by clause, knowing that we will have at a minimum 60 seconds per amendment to describe our amendment and argue for it. And in this instance, I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservative majority is hoist with its own petard. They cannot shut down debate at 5 o'clock on a Thursday and gavel through everything, thus precluding the rights of independents and smaller parties from presenting their amendments later at report stage. They can have one or the other. They can't have both. They force us into this process of running from committee to committee for clause by clause. At a minimum, we must be allowed to present our amendments in the committee. If that right is removed unilaterally, then, Mr. Speaker, I submit to you there is no question but that we revert to the general rules of parliamentary procedure, those found in O'Brien and Bost, which are very clear that members of Parliament in my position and that of the others in smaller parties and independents have a right to present substantive amendments at report stage. Mr. Speaker, that is what I intend to do tomorrow. I urge and I hope that you will rule that because the committee failed to live up to its own motion, it's no longer a situation of the committee makes its own rules. The committee has constructed this fake opportunity and herded the members of parliament from smaller parties and independents. We are exhorted and not just encouraged and invited, but in a sense coerced into a process not of our choosing. At a minimum, Mr. Speaker, since it was due to your ruling that this fake process was invented, at a minimum they have to live up to it, and if they fail to, then it reverts to our normal rules that we have the right to present amendments at report stage in clause by clause of C-23. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.